Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2020 Future of Research series. Over the next 3 months or so, we will be bringing you 12 sessions exploring ways in which research has adapted to be stronger, smarter, and fitter in terms of navigating the future. In today's session, the first of 4 this week, we'll be talking about bringing reality to research, looking at how we can evaluate concepts, environments, and stimuli which don't yet exist in the real world, and how we can allow our clients to walk in their customers' shoes to better understand their lives. Our session today will be about 45 minutes long, with half an hour or so of content from my colleagues, after which there'll be plenty of time for a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, please type them into the question box and we'll come back to them and answer them at the end of the presentations. We've got a number of speakers this afternoon. We have Pippa Bailey, who is our Head of Innovation. We have Lizzie Kopp from our Public Services team, Whitney Wells, who's a Director in our Healthcare practice, Sergio Gomez from the Qualitative team. But first of all, this afternoon, we're going to hear from Rich Garnon, who's part of our innovation team. Rich, over to you.
Great, thanks, Paul. Hope everyone can see me. And yes, thanks for joining this session. I hope you find it really interesting and informative. So we hear many challenges from you and our colleagues that we could actually better address through the use of virtual and augmented reality technology, such as the likes of how do we get closer to consumers? How do we actually walk in their shoes? How do we test new concepts and ideas that actually don't currently exist in the real world? And how do we create empathy to basically uncover more insights and gain more depth that we probably typically don't hear from more traditional routes? Over this session, we're going to talk to you about a handful of really interesting, exciting and diverse case studies that hopefully will give you a good understanding of how we're utilizing this technology, and also show you that it's not just a shiny new tool, but it's a very transformative technology that can be easily integrated into research. But first, we've had such a roller coaster of a year. It's been a lot of emotions and different experiences, and we've had to change and adapt our lives all in certain ways. And I want to talk to you about this in more detail. But you're probably thinking, how does this link to virtual and augmented reality technology? Well, first off, we've had to change the way we communicate. We've had from talking to our friends, talking to our family, talking to our colleagues, and actually physically working, all the way through to professionals such as doctors. We've had to quickly adapt and utilize digital technology in a lot more way and be more creative. We've also had less stimulation, and we've gone for long periods of time without sort of like direct contact with people. And generally, as human beings, we kind of need some form of interaction, or the sense of presence and the feeling of being with someone. And along with that, we've lost our sort of senses, and the sense of touch and smell. And now coming out of lockdown, we're now having to reignite those and sort of start utilizing them more, which is really fascinating. So during lockdown and also coming out of it, how have we started to solve this? One thing is using our imagination. It's such a powerful tool, and it actually doesn't matter how young or old you are, we can start utilizing our mind and our imagination. And as researchers, we start to break down what that means and what is reality. Because reality in a nutshell is about the environment and the situation around you, and then what you can touch, smell, see, and hear, or even emotionally feel. And it's all about being in present within that. So with our imagination and playing on our sense of presence through the use of virtual and augmented reality technology, we can truly transport anyone to any environment or situation. And then we can see how you respond and react along the way without actually losing that sense of reality. Because we can make you believe, and we can make participants believe when they're in that environment or in that situation. We can take certain elements from this technology and even the physical elements as well, such as you can see in this image here of how we manipulate your body to create certain scenarios and situations. And we'll talk about one of these examples later on in the case study. And then we can basically, from a research perspective, we can then learn from this and learn from your responses, and also uncover those subconscious reactions that we might not typically pick up in more traditional research approaches, because we can manipulate those environments, such as the different and your senses, to to uncover that subconscious reaction. And to break it back a bit and to sort of take a step back, it's actually all about understanding what you want to achieve, what your business questions are, and what you're trying to achieve, and creating that right context. And then we take certain elements of that technology and utilize it, and to meet your needs and to bring it to life for those participants. And we'll illustrate this later on within these handful of case studies. But first, I just want to talk to you about how actually, again, it's not a shiny new tool, but is a very transformative technology. A few years ago, we partnered with the BBC, and we wanted to understand how people would use virtual reality and how it will become a sort of a medium for creating and consuming content, and how would they use that in their daily lives. So we conducted a longitudinal study, 6-month study on a qualitative scale, and we found some amazing, really interesting insights. And one of the most powerful insights was that when people first received the headset, they played with it for a couple of minutes. They went on games. They played on sort of the more gimmicky applications, such as the roller coaster app, which if some of you have been on virtual reality, you've probably gone to first. But by the end of the 6 months, it had become habitual. It had become part of their daily routine, and which was really fascinating because they were watching long form content. So there was content such as David Attenborough's Walking with Dinosaurs, which is an hour-long episode or series, and people would just engage with it, and they were using these headsets for that long length of time without feeling sick, or they were really transported into that environment. So it's really powerful, and people really do start to pick up on it quite quickly. So it has come of age, and it does have a clear role to play in providing insights and research capabilities. I'm not here to tell you it's going to replace everything, because we're going to still need our more traditional routes of research, such as central location work, but we need to start utilizing this technology and taking certain elements of it and integrating into our research applications, especially to answer those questions that we haven't been able to answer for those few years and those research challenges, because we can start immersing people into those unexplored, hard to reach environments. We can augment new product concepts and designs that don't yet exist. And we can even use it to bring data to life. So instead of using PowerPoint or Word documents for those to report back, we can start utilizing and immersing people into the insights, and then it lives on for longer. We're going to share with you now a handful of case studies, which hopefully will be very exciting for you, and you learn a lot more about this technology and what we're doing at Ipsos. I'm now going to hand over to Pippa, so just bear with me whilst I just transfer you guys over to her. She'll talk about the first case study.
Thanks, Rich. So I'd like to share with you a collaborative project that we undertook with the Royal Shakespeare Company and VR AR specialist Gorilla in the Room. Now, this was a few years ago, but we had the question, can virtual reality truly transport people such that they feel that they're actually there? But almost more than that, can it create the same sense of emotional engagement? Now, for this, we used an RSC production called Titus Andronicus, and we want to share with you now a short video which shows you an introduction to how the live audience reacted to this performance. It's considered to be Shakespeare's most bloody and gory play, so do hold yourself. Give me a couple of seconds. I'm just going to move over to video now.
I just thought it was amazing, incredibly powerful. The cast were just superb, real vibrant energy.
Thrilling, yeah.
The Roman plays, I've seen all three, and this one, oh my God.
was scary.
It was.
But in a good way.
It is brutal as it ought to be. It is ravishing as it ought to be.
It was amazing and immersive.
Shocking, bloody, gory.
Powerful from start to finish.
I was crying at one point.
Even if you don't really come to see plays that often, it is really one of those plays that you can get stuck into.
I'm just amazed.
Go and see it, absolutely.
It's just different and it's very compelling.
I don't think there are words.
Brace yourself.
So you can see there the reaction of people who saw that performance live at the theatre. But we also wanted to look at how did people react when that same live performance was streamed to cinema, but also how would people react when they watched the whole 3-hour performance within a VR headset, looking at a 360 VR video recording of that production. Now, we wanted to understand the emotional engagement, so we used heart rate monitors. So everyone who took part in this wore heart rate monitors while they were watching the performances. And then at the end of seeing the production, whichever condition they were in, we asked a number of kind of qualitative and quantitative questions about their experience of actually seeing the production. Now, what was quite interesting was that when we looked at the number of peaks that we saw in heart rate, so significant rises in heart rate, and the duration of those peaks, they were actually very similar across the 3 conditions. And this tells us something important. So to address that kind of question, virtual reality truly does have the ability to make people have the same emotional engagement as if they'd been there live at the theatre. So this was very interesting for us. Secondly, 9 out of 10 people who viewed the performance in the VR headset said that there were moments where they felt they were actually there at the theatre. They forgot they were sitting with the headset on and they thought they were at the theatre. And this compared to only 7 in 10 who watched the performance live to cinema. But almost more importantly than that, we saw that actually the duration of this sensation, this kind of sense of presence, lasted for far longer with the VR headset than it did in the cinema condition. And we have many kind of accidental insights and fun anecdotes from this, what was an incredible project. But one of my favourites was that we had a gentleman who was watching the performance in the VR headset. And partway through watching the performance, he kicked off his shoes. And then he tilted his head down to look into his lap and visibly jumped in his seat when he realised that his legs weren't there. Which was kind of humorous, but critically what it showed us that he had totally forgotten where he was. He was relaxed, he was very immersed in the performance, and he'd forgotten that he was sat there wearing a VR headset. And finally, when we looked at the verbatim responses, so we just did a video recording, people straight to camera as soon as they came out, how did you find the performance? When we analysed the text and sentiment of what people had said, we saw that both theatre and virtual reality were perceived to be more shocking. The experience of watching the performance was more shocking than it was at cinema. But when we looked at engagement, so people were saying they were riveted, they were engaged, they were engrossed, they were captivated, we saw that actually theatre and VR were very much on a par. And if anything, there was a slightly stronger directional increase in the VR. So, incredible project. But what it did demonstrate to us as a research agency looking to, can we apply this technology for research? Does it have any value? Is yes, it did transport people. It did make them feel like they were actually there and present and had created a mindset which was similar to being in the live situation. And we saw that strength of reaction from people. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Lizzie, who's going to share with you another example of how virtual reality has been applied for one of our clients. Lizzie.
Thanks, Pippa. Just going to share my screen for everybody. Okay, So for this next part of the webinar, I'm going to be talking through an example of how we've generated insight using VR for some fast turnaround research that we conducted for Highways England. Highways England manage the motorways and A roads in this country, and we were doing a big program of research for them that was all about the road user experience in the context specifically of major roadworks. And for this component of that program, we were using VR to explore the road user experience of going along diversion routes in the event of a closure on the motorway. So some of you might have had this experience yourselves. You're driving along the motorway and then suddenly, unexpectedly, you're diverted off to a local area that you don't know. And Highways England wanted to know what they could do to make this experience the best that it could be for drivers. How could they make journey times faster? How could they enable people to navigate the diversion route better? And one of the things that they have in their control is the type of signage that they use. So we were using VR to recreate the experience of driving along a diversion route, to put people in the driver's seat as if they were sat in the car, and we use computer generated imagery to overlay digital versions of particular types of signage that Highways England wanted to test. So those signs weren't actually on the road yet, which is where VR is really helpful, because it can be used in comms testing, for example, to test things which don't exist yet in the real world. And traveling past signage at speed, capturing that in VR was actually really powerful and really important. The alternative would have been for us to have asked people to make a journey and to recall it, but of course we wouldn't have been able to do the signage testing with that. And you have all types of recall effects as well. Sometimes the most important and interesting things that come out of a study are actually not the things that participants will recall. Or we could have shown people static images of signage, but that's not the same as traveling at speed past a sign and checking what people take from it, what they can remember. So this is the setup here that we had. You can see in the picture on the slide, we created, if you like, this kind of semi-observational environment. We couldn't be in the car with people while they were driving. That wouldn't be safe or ethical, but we could go with them along this virtual journey. And we asked them, we could probe them about what they'd seen at certain points in the video that they saw on the headset in 360 view. And we also asked them just to think out loud, to tell us what are you thinking, what are you feeling, what would you be doing right now at this particular point in the journey. And it worked really, really well. So I'm going to show you an excerpt of the video that we had uploaded to the headset, just like our participant is wearing there in the image. And while I just draw that up for you, the important thing to note with this video is that we are going to be seeing it in tunnel vision, because obviously we're looking at it in a kind of traditional 2D video format, whereas our participants, of course, they had the 360 headset on, so they could look left and they could see out of the passenger side of the car, they could look right and see out of the driver's side. So we'll just start the video now. So at this point, our participants also had the sound of the car engine as well, and they could hear the indicator for left and right. And we told them, tell us what you see. Up on the left, the black sign here is CGI signage. So we were able to ask people, what did you catch from that sign? What did you see? And it was quite interesting, actually, because not everybody sees the same thing on the sign. Some people took the number of minutes that the diversion would be. Some people took the number of miles, and they told us what would be most helpful for them. So Pippa described how some of the people in her case study example had done things like kicking off their shoes in the theatre, and we actually saw a similar thing, which kind of added to the insight that we created. So we had people leaning forward as they approached the roundabout in the video. They were looking out of the driver's side to the right, just like you do when you're looking for oncoming traffic. And some of them were reaching out with their left hand as well. We asked them, what are you doing? Are you turning the radio on? And they said, no, I'm reaching for the sat nav because I'd lost the signage and I just wouldn't be following it by now. I would have given up by this point. I would have pulled over and I'd just be relying on my sat nav. That's the second bit of CGI on the left there. So this really added to the insight that we created on this project, because it told us that things like satellite navigation are really, really important. And actually, that's something that we kind of didn't consider the salience of that when we started this research project. So little insights like that were really helpful, and we just wouldn't have got those if we hadn't done this in VR. So that was just an illustrative example of something that we've done, and I hope that you can see how this could have helpful applications in other settings. For example, something like comms testing, if you wanted to recreate the environment of a town centre, for example, and test out-of-home advertising, this would work really, really well for testing comms in the setting that they're intended for. So this was Highways England, and I'm going to hand over now to Whitney, who will talk us through a totally different example from a different sector.
Thank you, Lizzie. So as Lizzie hands that over, I'm going to take a moment to reflect on what we've seen so far. So we have seen how VR can create immersion and make people feel like they're truly there. We've seen how VR can augment research so that we can get research that's more true to real life. So what I'm going to take us through, as I said now, is an example of how we can actually build empathy with virtual reality. And I'm very excited to take us through this opportunity because it's something that addresses a really critical need in my corner of the industry. So I work with pharmaceutical and healthcare companies to look at how patients and physicians who are using their products experience them and what can be done to improve these experiences. Now, often they are going after quite small, niche, hard to reach groups. And I can see the slides have just come up, so thank you for that, and I'll tell you when to change. So often they are going to small niche target groups that can be hard to reach, as I mentioned. And so in that case, it can be quite challenging to actually kind of conduct the field work and recruitment for these audiences. Now, over the past few years, there's been a huge shift in the pharmaceutical industry to increase the amount of patient centricity. So conducting more research with patients, increasing the focus on the patient voice, which is fantastic. But still, I can't tell you the number of times that someone at one of these healthcare companies working in asthma, for example, has said to me, you know, I do all this research, I do all this market research of patients, but I've never actually met someone who has asthma. And I think it's really hard to improve services for someone with asthma if you don't have it, let alone if you've never, spoken to someone who does have it. So when I think about patient centricity, I want to think about how we can go beyond just conducting research with patients and how we can actually go a step further. So one of our clients, Bayer here, which is a major healthcare and pharmaceutical company, reached out to us wanting to increase their focus within their team on patient centricity. So they wanted to increase the focus both within their team culture, but also then having that cascade effect. So ultimately having that more informed and embedded in the products and services that they were creating. Now, we wanted to go a step further for Bayer than a traditional project. So rather than just conducting more research with these patients, we wanted to actually do something a bit more immersive. And so we thought about what can we do to help them understand what it's really like to be one of their patients. Now, as Lizzie mentioned, there are sometimes ethical concerns with research, so I couldn't actually give my clients chronic pain, but the beauty of VR is that it can help us do things, reach audiences, or put people in places that we couldn't otherwise do for access or for ethical considerations. So I think what we came up with was a pretty good next best. So on the next slide, what we'll see is that we went with a multimodal workshop approach. So what we had here was 3 stations. In the first station, we actually put VR headsets on our clients at the workshop, and they were immersed into a patient's home. Now I'll show the video to you in a moment, so you don't have to take my word for it, but essentially they were able to step into a patient's kitchen. Someone with chronic pain was talking them through their experiences, highlighting challenges that they had, and highlighting anything that came up in these challenges. And I'm going to go ahead and play the video here. Before we press play, I just want to call out one other factor that you'll see here as the video goes, which is that the patient was actually able to say to us, the parts that, the pain points I really want to call attention to are here during this activity, that sort of thing. So you'll actually see highlights pop up showing this. So I'm going to go ahead and let the video play now, and I'll be back in a moment.
So I always open the cupboards before I go to the dishwasher, just so it helps me when I'm carrying things back across. This is where pain really hurts, in my shoulder and my back, pulling the drawers out to retrieve the plates, etc. Do you know what, the hardest part is the bending over, particularly for my lower back. And unfortunately, we have quite high cupboards, so I have to stretch forward to put the plates and bowls in, and that pulls in my back and my shoulder. With the back strains, I've tried some sort of freezing gels, which helps but very temporarily, and then have resorted to drugs like cocodamol. It takes a long time because I'm taking one or two things at a time, whereas previously I would have taken whole bundles of things and taken it to the cupboards quite easily. Going down to the lower shelf of the dishwasher is where it really hurts, actually. That's quite a stretch for me.
Now, what we saw from this video is that you are able to really step into this patient's home, as I said. And so that was the first station. The second station, we actually went a step beyond VR, and we put our clients into bodysuits. So we had restricted chests in the bodysuits, which simulates shortness of breath, goggles with visual impairments, actually nerve pain and tremors, restricted joint movement. And then we had our clients try to walk around the office or do things like fill a cup of tea while experiencing that pain or tremors. And so they got to, walk a mile in the patient's shoes. And then the third station you see here is that we actually had a real live patient come in, because these tech solutions aren't always something that should be replacing what we're doing already, but sometimes they can really powerfully augment what's happened. And so in this case, after they had stepped into the patient's home, and then after they stepped into the patient's shoes, then they actually sat down with the patient to digest what they'd experienced, to reflect on everything and kind of think about what they'd felt, and ask, oh, I noticed this, how do you feel about that kind of thing. So now, putting it all together, after we see them stepping into their shoes, stepping into their home, thinking about the impact that this had, we're going to go on to the next slide that actually shares quotes of what the clients experienced, because it was really incredible to see the impact that this had. And the clients also mentioned the impact that this workshop had. So I'm going to let you look at these quotes for a moment. I thought it was amazing to see what you can do when you go beyond, as Rich said, just delivering a PowerPoint and summarizing what patients said in the research. What the goal here was to gain insights into their patients, but we went beyond insights. They actually got to experience what it felt like, what the challenges were, what unmet needs this would bring up in terms of the things that were really hard for patients. And as we're able to see what patients are experiencing beyond what they think to mention, as Pippa mentioned with the recall bias, you actually do get the chance to walk a mile in their footsteps. And so it was really incredible to kind of watch how this played out. It was quite different and exciting. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Sergio, who's going to now share something a little bit different, which is switching gears to look at augmented reality.
So hopefully everyone can see the screen. So we're now going to talk about augmented reality and how it's becoming more of an integrated into our research capabilities, and how we're using it to layer into our different concepts in different areas. So to give you an idea of what we've done recently with a large global automotive client, we created an augmented reality app and capability, because especially with automotive, they want to test different designs quite quickly, and they have loads of different concepts such as wheel designs, steering wheels, whole host of different features that they want to be able to test and then get them produced. typically it can be quite time consuming and quite costly because you have to create physical prototypes and then recruit people to a central location. However, with the power of AR, what we've done here with our clients is that we created the AR app, and we were able to trigger different versions of the wheel concepts onto a tire. And then the participant was then able to scroll through the different designs and be able to see which one they preferred and then answer a survey afterwards or a diary afterwards. This was very strong and powerful for the client because we were able to whittle down to a handful of different designs that they were then able to create prototype versions. So this is just one example of how we've utilized AR technology. And at Ipsos, as researchers as well, we want to understand the technology and actually how powerful it is and what it can bring to people, and that sort of sense of presence. So working with Grin in the Room, we conducted a survey or a project to understand how realistic AR content is and digital content, the 3D imagery here, as you can see in this video image. And what we found was it was actually 2.5 times more realistic than a flat 2D image that we may typically use in existing research capabilities. So it's just proven that it is a powerful way of using and such a simple way of testing different concepts and ideas that don't currently exist. And we have explored, and there are so many. We've just shared with you a handful of case studies of where we've started to utilize it, such as AR and virtual reality, but there is a whole host of different examples out there in the world that we can start exploring with you guys and understanding how we can utilize the technology even more, from the likes of placing kids into VR environments or augmented reality to see how they respond to it, all the way through to healthcare, using it to understand the body, for retail and e-commerce and commerce as well, just to understand how your product looks in your home, through to supermarkets, so testing new concepts, ideas in virtual supermarkets to understand how you look compared to your competitors, layouts of different stores. You're creating the environment so you can see where it can go, all the way through to creating high street banks, for example, that the future of high street banks, what are they going to look like? Travel hubs, what are they going to look like? Underground stations, things that don't actually exist yet, we can test them out fully and see what people and how people respond and react to that along the way. So that was just a few examples, and we're going to see, hopefully, AR essentially is going to be one of the leading ways as well, along with AR, VR, and it's going to become more integrated into our lives, such as through headsets, more headsets that we can wear during our daily routines, and utilize the technology more and more. So I'm just going to hand over to Paul to do the wrap up.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you all of our speakers this afternoon. As I hope you'll have seen in the last 30 minutes or so, VR and AR are extraordinarily powerful tools and can do so many different things. We've already seen that they can immerse people into different environments, into places where we might not otherwise be able to take them easily, or just places don't even exist. We can get so close to real reactions. The comments in the Highways England case, in the RSC case, where we were seeing people reacting instinctively in an immersive virtual environment. The third thing, and I think one of the most powerful for me, is that idea of helping you to walk in customer or client shoes. Whether that's by use of 3D cameras, or actually using bodysuits and VR to give people a sense of the reality of what a condition might feel like. And then finally, there's also the opportunity in more operational research opportunities to think about context, to think about mindset, and just getting people in the right place to start evaluating stimulus. So I'm sure this has generated lots of questions. I already have a number that have come in, and I'll be asking the panel to address those. But if you've got other questions, do please type them into the chat and we'll feed them in. But for now, can I invite all the panelists to put their cameras on, including Sergio? I think you're back with us. So folks, do please put your cameras on. And maybe we'll lose the slides, so we just get ourselves. Okay, so thank you again all. And the first question, or first couple of questions really, all very much relate to the same thing. And it's, I guess, about the practicalities of using VR, and whether or not you need to kind of warm people up to it. Do you need to have them do some kind of activity before they watch an entire Shakespeare play or go for a virtual drive? What do we need to do to warm people up? Maybe
I can take this. I can take this one, Paul. So yeah, because you'd be surprised, very few people have worn a VR headset unless they happen to be a big gamer. And in the Shakespeare work that we did, we had participants from 20 into their 70s, and we did warm them up. We got them used to getting the headset, getting it comfortable, and then they watched an experience to begin with, a short film of a beach, so that they could look and they could kind of wander around, look where they wanted to go, and then they could adjust the headset and have another play, just to make sure that they were fully comfortable and they could see how it worked. And you know, we had glass wearers as well, so they got comfortable as well. Lizzie. Sorry, Lizzie, did you have something to add for the Highways England?
Yeah, Lizzie, did you have any Highways England perspective to add to that?
Yeah, just to add, the question is a really important one actually, because the motion effect of driving, people do need to get used to that when they've got the headset on. So we had a much longer clip, and we gave them sort of short bursts of it before they went through the whole experience.
I'd actually add to that a little bit. Whitney, you were talking about, you know, putting people in bodysuits and all sorts of extraordinary things. Again, was that something you just put people into and threw them straight into the patient environment, or again, did you need to do warm-ups there?
Yeah, absolutely. And for our case, given it was a workshop style session, we actually had, you know, a whole team of clients together, and so it did become a little bit kind of more of an informal getting comfortable with it, where they would put on the chest restriction that would show restriction of breath, and then they would be kind of standing there joking with each other about how it feels, and you know, it's also something a bit different to be doing with your colleagues, and so you know, they would be talking about how different it was and that sort of thing. And so it wasn't something that they kind of stood, put everything on, and then we said, okay, off you go. It was something that they were kind of experiencing it. They would maybe put on different parts, maybe not have all of it on at once, but then as they got comfortable with it, then they would actually say, I actually want to try what it feels like to actually now try walking around the office and see how hard that is.
Brilliant, thank you. And another question, and this is, I suppose, this is the classic where the rubber hits the road, if you'll pardon the pun, bearing in mind a couple of our case studies, which is, okay, this looks really cool, this looks really impressive, but have clients taken actions on the back of VR research that they wouldn't have taken if we hadn't been able to use the medium? So does the methodology actually make a tangible difference to the outcomes, to the deliveries, the decisions you can make? I'm actually going to ask Lizzie this question first, because I think I know the answer.
Yeah, an easy one. Very simply, it did for Highways England. It completely informed the decision on the types of messages that they showed on the signing, the number of signs that they had along the route, the spacing between them. One thing that I neglected to mention was that we did do other forms of research as part of this whole package as well. It wasn't just VR. So there's the very kind of direct, obvious example, and then there's the kind of taking a step back and thinking about things more holistically. So that example I gave of reaching out to touch the sat nav on the dashboard, that really told Highways England that they need to look at the bigger picture. You can't only focus on signage. You need to think behaviourally about all of the other things that could be impacting driver behaviour. Yeah, all of the other things that are going on.
Whitney, Pippa, anything to add to that? Both waiting for the others to speak.
I'll go first.
Go on,
Certainly for the example with Bayer, I think that's one of those places where it is actually a little bit harder to measure. There was one particular decision they made differently, where it was more at the outset for them to achieve kind of a change in the team culture. And so it's something that, you know, down the road, I have every belief that it does actually make a difference. And as I said, I think it's just something of when you have companies where they haven't met or experienced someone with their condition, I think it it just makes a huge difference in terms of the conversations around the office, or when you're sitting in a boardroom actually thinking about different services, to have in your mind, oh, I experienced this and I felt that, or I saw this in the video with these patients.
Yeah, and I think this idea, we know how much this walking in client shoes can help inform decision making, but as you say, harder to find the tangibles there. Pippa, there was a question actually relating right back to the RSC example. We were getting someone in VR for 3 hours, and I suppose to some extent I would apply this question to others of you. But was there anything we needed to bear in mind when we were putting people through a 3-hour immersion experience? Is there anything we need to do to look after our participants in these?
Yeah, very, very definitely. We had quite a stringent screening process, so we wanted to make sure that no one was suffering from heart conditions or any visual kind of conditions, any neurological things. So we were quite strict in anyone who had kind of health conditions where we thought there could even be the slightest impact of watching, what is quite a long performance. But we gave people, no one was incentivized to take part in the research, and they were told that they could leave at any time. And we did one-on-one care because it was unique. This is the first time we believe that this has been done. And we did also do a kind of due diligence test. So they actually had an additional break for 5 minutes before the first interval, and then again in the second half, where creatively the RSC said, this is a really good break where you're not going to ruin the story. And we added those because a number of us, I think a dozen of us, tried it before we did it with the participants and said, yes, I think if we have a break here and we have a break here, that'll work. But yes, so definitely screening. We're learning more all the time about the impacts of virtuality, and the headsets, Rich will be able to tell us more, but are improving all the time. So some of these, sickness is to do with the synchronicity of the visual in the different, to the different eyes, but it's improving all the time. But everybody stayed in for the whole 3 hours. And I said, we had some people, in their 70s, early 80s who took part, and they were like, no, I'm fine, I'm happy, I'm comfortable. So, it was 360 VR video rather than full immersive movement, but, it worked well.
And again, I know the experiences weren't as long, Whitney, Lizzie, but in terms of learnings about managing people through the process, was there anything else that it's useful? Maybe Lizzie, was there anything that you'd share from in terms of how do we get people through that research experience?
I think always having a good briefing, first of all, about how everything is going to work, as you would for any qualitative research, really, just explaining that clearly to set expectations, including on the timings. But the testing that we already talked about, it is important, like I say, for anything that's involving motion. You definitely want to test that out and not continue if anybody feels nauseous. We didn't have that with any of our participants, and I think we did it with something like 24 in total. Otherwise, I think just explaining what the setting is going to be like, first of all, to people is important.
Whitney, any learnings from your side?
Yeah, I think in our case, obviously the clip is much shorter, and so we didn't have any of those challenges with motion sickness or anything like that. But I think for us, it's also a case of thinking about then applications and how it can be used. Where if you think about the way we used it in a workshop setting, that's great to have kind of this one-off workshop where everyone's come together, and it was actually very powerful to have everyone from an entire team there together. So they were having discussions together as a team of like, oh, what do you think then about what we should do with this product, or that sort of thing. So absolutely having that as kind of a team building strategizing session. But there are certainly other ways that it can be used. So one of the big ways that was discussed was thinking about having this be used as part of an induction session. Obviously, it's not an incredibly long clip. As long as you can get the VR headsets, it's quite easy actually to then be able to use it in other settings. And so it was discussed of, okay, in new joiner inductions, or when people are starting out, let's have everyone go through this experience so that then we're on a baseline level playing field where everyone has experienced at least that little slice of a patient's experience. So everyone coming into the team has that understanding already.
Thank you, Whitney. I've got one more question. If there are any more questions out there, if any of our audience have them, please just type them into the into the chat box now, and we'll pick those up. But I have one more question just for now, which I guess again is a very pragmatic one. This all looks very cool. There's lots of good stuff that we can do here. Does this come at a huge price tag? What does it cost to add some sort of cool VR like that to one of our projects? Again, I'm going to start with Lizzie again, because I know you've got a point of view on this, and then maybe Pippa, Whitney, I'll come back to you guys as well.
Yeah, it really costs no more than doing, for example, creating a traditional video. Using the consultants that we worked with, Gorilla in the Room, sort of in the order of a few thousand for creating something like we did for Highways England, which in the end was a video of about 7-8 minutes in length, I think. And there's a bit of setup work involved. If you're filming a route or an environment like we were, then that needs to be filmed several times to make sure that you get uninterrupted cuts and the scenery is how you want it. And then the other element is the CGI. So obviously, how long is a piece of string? It all depends how complex you want to go, but certainly no more expensive than if you were piecing together a traditional piece of film.
Brilliant. Anything else, Pip, one ought to bear in mind in this kind of context, or Rich, if this is maybe a more question for you?
Yeah, I just jump in here. So yeah, and when Lizzie was talking about the CGI, that it requires a software developer or the user likes of a VR company. But again, you're talking depending what you want to create, because there's the beauty of it, you can create anything you want. But you're looking at say 10-15,000 to say create a supermarket with a few shelves and layout, or designing a new bank layout as well. You're looking at around those sort of prices to build the software and to have it ready for research purposes. And then on top is just the normal research requirements of moderator and just recruitment participants as well. So it is the additional cost, but for the long-term goal of your project and how it integrates into your existing research capabilities, it has a lot more impact and return on investment we've seen for our clients, because they can utilize that software or that environments over the year, 2 years, and put people back into those environments, tweak it, and do different types of research projects with that same environment that they've paid for at the start.
Great, thank you, Rich, and thank you to our panelists. It looks like that's our last question. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope that we build this as the future of research, and it certainly has the feeling that it's going to be. There are, of course, 3 more sessions this week, looking at things like behaviour change and semiotics, and a very interesting session on Wednesday talking about some of the challenges facing the retail environment over the last 6 months. So please do sign up for sessions for the rest of the week, and of course our sessions in October and November. But for now, thank you very much for your time. Do get in touch with any one of the panelists or with myself, Paul Stamper, if you've got any questions following up on this. Have a good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.